Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Policy Circle's Move the Needle virtual experience on transparency and accountability. I am Kim Borchers, and I'm the Associate Director of Civic Engagement here at the Policy Circle. And for those of you who are new to the Policy Circle Move the Needle, we are a nonpartisan 501c3 grassroots organization. And we provide pathways for women to become more informed, engaged, and effective civic leaders. We want to extend a special thank you to all of our members, our circle leaders and state leadership council members, and for all that you do to make this such a thriving community for women who are seeking opportunities to learn and to lead. We also want to thank our network collaborators for their support of this program, which it would not be possible without them. Today's discussion, we'll be focusing on our newly launched Transparency and Accountability Policy Circle Brief, and if you haven't had a chance to read it, click on the link in the chat to check it out. Policy Circle briefs are the basis for all of our programming here at the Policy Circle, and these are carefully curated from reliable sources and then vetted by experts and our members. So, having spent 7 years working on the senior team of a governor, today's topic is near and dear to my heart. I'm a little bit of a nerd on transparency and accountability, and quite honestly, I wish I had known the three panelists that you will have the opportunity to meet today when I did my tour of state duty working for a governor. As you get more of this information, just like myself, there are so many places that we can make a difference where we live and make a true impact. So our conversation today, we're going to focus on the importance of government transparency and accountability, and we're also going to define it. It's important to know what it is if you're going to utilize it as a tool to hold people accountable. And the goal for each of us as we walk away is that we're more informed and that we are equipped to tackle the issues in our communities with knowledge and compassion. So I'd like to introduce our first guest, Kristen Cox. Kristen is the world's leading authority on how to apply the theory of constraints to government and nonprofits. She is perhaps best known for her work as the former executive director of the Governor's Office of Management and Budget for the state of Utah, where she orchestrated a 35% improvement across Utah's $20 billion executive branch. She is currently the executive director of the Initiative on Government Improvement for the University of Utah's Eckley School of Business, and she is a senior fellow for the eRepublic Center for Digital Government. Chris is also the author of 2 books, an advisory board member, a keynote speaker, a consultant, a trainer, and co-founder of the Fulcrum. Welcome, Kristen Cox.
Hi, Kim. How are you?
I am fantastic, and I'm like giddy to be with you today.
Me too. We're kind of wonky this way. We love this stuff.
We are, and you know, I'm going to ask all the panelists to do this because I think our resumes say what we've done, but they really don't tell the story of who we are. For our folks who are watching and listening today, can you give just a brief background? How did you end up in this line of work?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I'm blind. And so if I'm not looking right at the camera, I apologize. My eyes kind of drift, but that's part of my story. So as I was going blind and losing a lot of vision in my kind of late teens and 20s, I was, and in K through 12, I was case managed on every plan. I had individualized education plans, individualized employment plans. I was on Social Security disability insurance and ticket to work. And, you know, when you're in the bureaucracy, you can feel stuck and it's overwhelming. And it's not that the people are bad. For the most part, I know people, show up to work because they want to do a good job. But the system was just challenging. And I was one of the lucky ones. I had some mentors who were blind who came into my life and, how to do some intense retraining and how to do my life, but it was, made the transition. And from there I went to DC and worked for some governors back there in the Bush administration, and then found my way back here to Utah, ran a large agency, and then over the governor's budget and operations for 8 years. So very circuitous route, but I see it from running an agency to the governor's level, from the federal government's level as well, because I worked back in DC, and then from the front line. And I think it's so easy in all of our complexity of government, which I think complexity is just a cop-out for not having clarity. What are we trying to deliver for the customer and the taxpayer? And we can make things so much more difficult than they actually need to be.
Well, and I thank you so much for sharing your story, because it's the whole purpose of why we have some of the services that we have, right? The ultimate end is to assist that customer, but if we're not achieving it, then we haven't done our mission. So let's start off. You and I talked a little bit about this. would you define accountability and transparency? Because those two words are thrown out a lot these days.
Yeah. I actually have a list of words like integration, alignment, duplication of effort, transformation, all these words we use, accountability, transparency, but we don't know what they really mean. And let me talk first about accountability and then transparency. Accountability, we're supposed to report on, evaluate, account for what we did. But the question is, what are we accountable for? And that singular question for me, when I work with our organizations, when I work across all of our cabinet members, the clarity of what are we accountable for, 99% of the time isn't there. So I can use these really vague aspirational goals. I think there's a slide here you can pull.
Yes.
Higher education should be affordable and accessible. Empower people with disabilities. 21st century workforce. We keep kids and families safe. I mean, very vague, aspirational, nice mission statements. But when we get down to it, when we say, for example, affordable higher education, do we mean it doesn't grow higher than the CPI? Does it mean that student debt doesn't exceed more than 10% of their gross salary? What do we mean by this?
Right.
And if we don't have clarity on this thing we're trying to deliver for the customer, then anything goes. We can track tons of data, we can track lots of information, but we don't know exactly what we're ultimately responsible for when it comes to the customer and the taxpayer. Transparency.
Well, you mentioned another word, data.
Yes.
And states have so much data.
Yeah.
And yet my question always was, well, why are we running that report? I mean, is it just to be able to print it out and say you put it in a notebook? I mean, so can you give me some examples of where data gets confused with insight and clarity on what is really happening in government?
So I love this because data are just words and numbers. And the biggest breakthroughs we've had in private sector companies or the sciences has come from people asking the right questions. When we ask the right questions, we can pull the right data. And when I took over the governor's office management budget, I was getting 631 measures a month from 24 cabinet members. No insight, just a lot of noise. And what we're looking for is signal out of the noise. So I have a couple slides here to show you. This is just how typical budgets work. And I'm not even going to go deep into this, and just Kim, Maddie work with me because I have no idea what's on the screen. But the first slide, we take a big budget, human services, and then they break it down into what we call line items. And then in the line item, you'll see, let's say, older adult protective services. And then there'll be tons of data on if it's federally funded, state funded, user fees, restricted accounts, tons of data there. Interesting, no insight. You can go to the next slide. And then we'll go in even deeper, right? And this is where we get lost. I'm not saying government shouldn't have open books and show everything we expend, but they'll break down one program into smaller buckets. These are a few of the buckets they look at. Personnel, 3.1 million, in-state travel, out-of-state travel. Then they do break it down even more. So you can look at out-of-state travel and break that down. You can look at number of printers purchased, number of water bottles purchased. And we can get to such granularity, we can't see the forest through the trees. But here's the trick. We focus on what we understand, right? So when we think things are complex, we break them into smaller and smaller pieces so we can get our head around it. So I'll see literally discussions on in-state travel here, because people understand what in-state travel is.
Right.
Interesting, but if I don't know what I'm accountable for, maybe my in-state budget went up, but my actual results are tenfold. So we, again, goes back to what are we accountable for? But what we don't seldom, where most of government misses the whole opportunity, is in, let's say this example here, this personnel services, 3.2 million. That's huge, and it's a black box. It's people, it's labor.
Right.
Most of the money in government is spent in direct benefits, like Medicaid, et cetera, or in labor. And those are operational issues. And you cannot find the causes of cost in the spreadsheets. The spreadsheets simply reflect what happened. It doesn't tell you why it happened. And when we can get a new lens in government, really deep embedded, and I'll give you some more examples during Q&A, we can start to see things that we didn't even know were there. And this program, for example, this is a program that's similar to child welfare. It's a very actually simple program to fix. There's a lot of issues going on with why are things getting stuck? Why is there rework? Why are there quality problems? Why is it taking 6 months for somebody to get a decision made if they need intervention or not? When we can go and solve those deeper issues, that's where all the money's spent. And you can flip these systems. Our 35% wasn't just cost cutting. Cost cutting actually worse if you don't know what your goal is. The causes of costs are deeply embedded in how the work gets done. And when we know that, we can start asking different questions that can get government, in my mind, 35, 50, 100% better with the resources they have. But usually we're not taught that in government. People learn policy analysis, which is great. We do lots of data dumps, but we believe that if we have more data, we'll have more understanding of reality. And I disagree. I think understanding of reality comes from clear thinking, knowing what the goal is, what's the problem we're trying to solve, and then how do we execute it? And we can know those basic things. We can have much less data with much higher impact. For me, if I'm not getting 25% improvement in a system, I'm not solving the real problem.
Well, and you make an interesting point. We also think more data sometimes means that we're doing something.
Mm-hmm.
And then in turn, well, the data is saying that we need more money.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of like, well, prove it. What are they doing outside of you showing me reams of paper?
Yeah.
And showing that the increase in spend is actually going to lead to better outcomes. Yeah. We also don't find that.
I started as people would come in to ask for budget requests, I started to notice patterns and I could start to anticipate what people would do. And I came up with this list called the Seductive 7. So people will jump to, I need more data, I need more money, I need to do another reorganization. If I just had a new piece of technology, a new case management system, that would solve my problem. If I just had, there's 7 of them. But it's these things that we jump to because we love jumping to solutions. What's more important is to reframe the problem. And when we understand the problem we're trying to solve, we may need data, we may need some technology, but we never want to jump to solutions until we understand what's blocking us from achieving the goal. How do I do better, faster, cheaper services? How do I get in a prison system a 25% reduction in recidivism? Like, what's blocking me from doing that? It's not a lack of data. And those are harder, deeper issues to think about. And that's why I'm really focused on this initiative I'm working on, because people have got to start seeing government. We find what we search for.
Yes.
If we don't know what to look for, we'll never find it. And we'll just keep spewing out complexity in government, which is just not necessary.
Well, Kristen, let me ask you, because sometimes it feels so overwhelming.
Yes.
You just look at all the issues, all the problems. You mentioned a myriad, corrections. Department of Children and Families, you look at the disability area. What do you think are the most important questions that people can ask government leaders when striving for accountability and transparency?
Yeah, okay. That's really good. And usually I'll look for, you can say, let me walk you through this, because there's a billion programs in government, right? What's your 80-20 rule? In Utah, there's about 6 programs that consumed about 80% of the budget. So that's one place to start. You can't fix everything. Time and attention is our biggest constraint, all right? Management time, our own individual time. So you can't focus on everything. What are you going to focus on? 80-20 rule. Ask your lead policy members, where are you spending 80% of your budget? Or even, it's not always 80-20, but what are the top 3 programs that are consuming most of the budget, or most consumers are touching, like driver's license. Then I look at this. What's my goal? Let's take the prison system, and then I'll pull up the slide for you. Let's say the goal in the prison system is to ensure that 100% of the inmates who leave the prison have a successful termination in half the time they usually do, meaning they meet all the requirements of their probation and parole, they have a job, they're successful, not in 3 years, but in 18 months. Pretty ambitious. We actually like to set goals that we don't know how to solve because it forces us to understand the gap. But then this is what I really want to ask. What's my goal? And then I ask these 3 questions, so you can pull up the slide. And it comes to this. This is the whole thing about accountability. You'll see a slide here. It says QT over OE, and let me define what that means. Quality, throughput, and operating expense. So basically, quality is, did I achieve the outcome I wanted in the prison system? In this case, did they actually terminate in 18 months? In other systems, were my decisions accurate? Or business permitting, did I get it done within the 2-day standard that I'm trying to meet? It's what did I effectively achieve the outcome? Throughput is about volume, demand on my system. How much work can I handle? Am I serving 100 people a month or 3,000 a month? It tells us a lot about speed and capacity. And then I want to know my cost. What's the cost to provide a quality product? And usually we have budget people on one side, and we have the people running the program who focus on the quality of it and how many people we serve, and they never marry. And what I want to understand for accountability is, we gave you $1. Are you getting more or less quality, or more or less? Can you serve more people for the money we gave you? Is your quality up? We've had one agency, Department of Commerce, our economy in Utah was going crazy. We had a 40% increase in growth. Their throughput, people served, no new money. We absorbed it all. So that tells me a lot. These three things in relationship to each other is where I want accountability. Looking at cost without impact to the customer and the taxpayer, or looking at quality. If we just do cost cutting and we think I'm going to slice the budget in half and my quality tanks, I actually may drive costs up over time.
Absolutely.
So these are simple variables. Yep.
Well, we'll probably get into this more into the lightning round.
Sure.
So we're gonna. This was excellent. You gave people a lot to think about, and I've never seen it that way. Like I said, I wish you had been on my bat dial phone when I worked for my boss. And so we'll welcome you back when we have the panel, all three of you. So thank you for that. So our next panelist is Adam Andrzejewski. And Adam is the CEO and founder of OpenTheBooks.com. And before dedicating his life to public service, Adam co-founded Homepages Directories, a $20 million publishing company. Today, OpenTheBooks.com is the largest private repository of U.S. public sector spending. And Adam's works have been featured on Good Morning America, C-SPAN, The Wall Street Journal, New York Times, CNN, Fox News, NPR, Forbes, and other national media. The Andrzejewski Open the Books investigation into congressional corruption is featured in a 2021 episode of CNBC's American Greed. Welcome, Adam.
It is great to be here, Kim. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Well done.
Well, first of all, when do you sleep? And secondly, I love people who have difficult last names, and you're so kind. Whenever you send something out, you actually give little helpers. So that means you're a good man, Adam.
Well, thank you, Kim. It's a fine reputation to live up to, and I'll try to do that here on the Zoom. Look, I'm really happy to be here. We just came out with a big national news story. It's been wall-to-wall Fox all week. We took our hard data and we fact-checked the Obama administration's person on the Sunday morning shows in June. They said that Democrats did not defund the police. It was Republicans. We took a look at the big city mayors. We found that they did defund their police. Mm-hmm. We filed a Freedom of Information Act request to see if those mayors were taking their personal protection from police on police details. And we found that they were spending millions of dollars of taxpayer money. And this is national news.
Yeah, I saw that in all those major cities, and it was interesting how they were spending all this the money for them, but not for the citizens who put them there. Adam, I'm asking this of everyone on this panel. What was the catalyst for you to decide to go into this project? Because this is not an easy one. Anybody who goes to Open the Books, I got in there, and I mean, you could get lost in there. Just all the data, and at the same time your head could be blowing up because you're frustrated with what you're seeing. What's the story on you getting involved in this area?
So I think you have to go back to when I was in the second and the fourth grade in 1976 and 1978, and my father, as a school teacher in our small town of Herscher, Illinois. Herscher is literally in the middle of nowhere, surrounded on all sides by 26 miles of fields. My father, as a local school teacher, 7 kids at home, the family at or near the federal poverty markers for my entire upbringing, he decided to run for state representative against one of the most powerful and most corrupt Illinois politicians in history. That actually means something, since Illinois is the Super Bowl of corruption. My father ran for state rep against George Ryan. And then obviously George Ryan became Speaker of the House, Secretary of State, Lieutenant Governor for a couple of terms, and then governor. And then he's one of the governors that the Department of Justice caught up with, and he served time in the federal penitentiary. So we knew Ryan on the home turf. My father will tell you stories. He passed in November, but my father told stories about how he was run off the road in the family car. Pressure was put on him at work, how our home was broken into, and that our phones were tapped. And so look, what we're going to talk about today, by and large, is how to get involved at the local level. And those are the toughest fights. My dad had that fight at the local level. I would not be doing this but for his experience. So I want I want to issue the challenge to everybody watching the video today to step up, get involved. You may run for office, you may lose, but your story, your effort can have generational impacts with your children.
I love that. Thank you so much for that. Well, Maddie's going to pop up a slide, and this stat is actually in our brief, and I was amazed by this. In 2019, the 20 largest federal agencies reported $175 billion improper payments. That's an average of $14.6 billion a month. Now, Adam, is that an enigma, or is this just what's happening in government?
So, Kim, what government programs running well? Okay, so we've investigated townships in Illinois, state governments, the federal government, tranches of federal spending. Not one single time have we found a government program running well. So, could it be the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS? Well, they've admitted that last year in 2020, they misspent $1 out of every $4 administering the Earned Income Tax program. That's the program that's supposed to help poor families. And $1 out of every $4 that they paid out of the program went to people who weren't qualified to receive the payment. That was $18 billion last year. What government program could be running well? Could it be Social Security? So Social Security admitted last year to improper and mistaken payments of $8 billion. But here's the deal. Our auditors went a little deeper. We took a look at their books, and their books are a mess. They actually have 6 million Social Security numbers active of people aged 112 and over. And only 40 of those people exist in the entire world. So,
Wow.
It gets a little worse on improper payments.
Well,
Congress has mandated the 20 largest federal agencies report their improper payments all the way back to 2004. We've added up what they've disclosed, and it's a stunning number of $2.5 trillion. And so, Kim, look, this government is not run by technocrats. This is institutionalized incompetence.
Well, Adam, so my question to you is, if you and I were sitting in a company and we did something like this, someone loses their jobs. And so, okay, we have a checks and balance. We find out that we have these types of overpayments. Is anybody held accountable for these actions? I think that's what's so perplexing.
So that is perplexing to the American people. So at the local level, the state level, and the federal level, there's an abject lack of investigations with teeth and clawback and prosecutions amongst, or just people that lose their job because of incompetence in the public sector. So you're exactly right. In the private sector, this would never go on. There is a very tight tolerance for anything like this. Think about this. In a private company, every single line item is audited. From an expense report, somebody has to provide receipts and sign off on every single line item. And it's just not that way with government. And that's actually why we have a bottom-up model, a transactional model. And so with Kristen, she has a top-down model of analysis, of taking aggregates, looking at them, and then breaking them down. We actually start at the granular transactional level. And this is important because this is the way it's done in the private sector. And that's how we differentiate ourselves from any other organization out there. We have captured all 23 million public employee salaries from the federal, state, and local level. So even in your K through 12 school districts, you can come to openthebooks.com and you can see who by name makes how much money for each of the last 4 years displayed for free right on our website. And you don't have to file a Freedom of Information Act request. Identify yourself to get the information. We've already done all that heavy lifting for you. Last year, incredibly, our auditors filed 40,000 of those requests. So we've put it all up there for you to see. We have all checkbook spending at the federal level, 49 out of 50 states, and in 11,100 local units of government, we have their checkbook vendor spending as well. So you can follow the money, so you can hold the political class accountable for tax and spend decisions.
So Adam, you mentioned an egregious spend, which was the Social Security numbers that are with people who shouldn't be alive today that are being used. But every time we turn on the TV, we keep hearing, oh, we need to spend more money in local governments for COVID-19. And my question to you, what is the total amount so far that has been passed for COVID-19 relief?
So the total amount for COVID-19 relief from Congress, I believe it's $6 trillion. But what's not talked about on top of that is the Federal Reserve has, I believe, a $5 trillion toolbox. And we're not exactly sure how much of that toolbox has been used in the fight. So total COVID spending that is either passed or in the toolbox could be as high as $11 trillion.
So let me ask you this. How would you direct people to find out how the COVID money is being spent in their area? I'm just going to give you an example that was just shared with me this week. There is a school district here in Kansas that's receiving like $4.6 million, and they want to build a health clinic. And I'm thinking to myself, a health clinic? I mean, this is one-time money. And why is the school district in the business of creating health clinics? How about you spend that on tutors for all of the school time that's been lost with those kids, where the education gap is? I mean, where would you advise them to look first?
So you can come to our website at openthebooks.com. On the homepage, scroll down to the map section. The third map in, we detail the amounts to the 30,000 municipalities across the country. So we don't have the K through 12 school districts on that map, but we do have your cities and your counties, and the amounts are stunning. For example, my opinion editorial was published in a premium spot at the Chicago Tribune 2 days ago. And in that editorial, we detail out the North Shore communities, like Winnetka and Glencoe and Wilmette and Highland Park. $12 million in the American Rescue Act bailed out Glencoe at 1.1 million, Winnetka at 1.5 million, Lake Forest at 2.4 million, Wilmette, where Sylvie's at 3.3 million, and Highland Park at 3.6 million. Right here in my hometown of Hinsdale, $2 million. The average home price is $1 million. You know, and it's the same in your communities across the country. I would start there. I would ask your mayor, go to our website, get the amount, and ask your mayor if they're going to send the money back. And if they're not, how they're going to spend it, and start right there.
And I think, you know, as we wrap this up, my concern always is when people get money like this, they start a brand new program, and then that program will continue to need funding, and then they'll raise taxes to continue that program. I mean, it's an easy way for the camel to get his nose underneath the tent.
Absolutely. So what we're coming out with, and I'd like to share this with Policy Circle when we come out with it, it's going to be unique. We've already coded it for Illinois. We can code it for every single K through 12 school district in the entire country because we're holding the data. In Illinois, I'm going to tell you what it is. It's a 3-page report you could walk into your school board meeting with. It lists the top 25 salaries, the top 25 retirement annuity pension recipients, and then it has analysis, comparison of the salary spend and the headcount at the district versus inflation. And we also band the number of employees into salary bands so you can see the headcounts of who's making how much. For example, in Hinsdale, one of our most highly compensated employees is our driver's ed teacher, who makes about $170,000.
Wow, that's amazing. Adam, I'm going to look forward to bringing you back to the lightning round. Thank you. You've given everybody a lot to think about. I hope they have their ibuprofen sitting next to them, because they might have a headache when we're done here thinking, okay, where do I begin? So thank you. I look forward now. Our next panelist is Kirk Allen. Kirk is the co-founder of the Edgar County Watchdogs, a 501c4 organization dedicated to fostering accountability, truth, and transparency in our local governing bodies. Kirk spent his career in the Air Force. He moved back to his family farm and operates a private business specializing in the fire industry. Currently serves as the fire chief and EMT with the Kansas Fire Protection District. And Kirk is the co-recipient of the 2016 State Policy Network's Vernon Kribel Foundation Unsung Hero Award. Welcome, Kirk. Thanks for having me, Kim. I appreciate it. Glad to be here. I'm so glad to have you. It's like I told you when I met you the first time, I'll never forget your name, because that's my twin brother's name. So I'm in trouble. I've asked everybody this question. And so, I'm going to save the best for last on this. What was the catalyst for you getting involved in Watchdog? Because, most people don't think, oh, I'm going to kind of taper down what my activities are. I mean, what's your story?
Well, as a volunteer fire chief and an EMT, received a call one night for an 11-day-old baby not breathing. And in our business, we risk little to save little, risk a lot to save a lot. And as a volunteer, I'm about 4 minutes from the ambulance bay. So I'm driving 100 miles an hour to get to the ambulance bay for an 11-day-old baby not breathing. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, when we get to the scene, the child was fine, but my concern shifted to, what did the dispatcher know? What did they ask? And I contacted them and asked, hey, if the child was not breathing, why didn't you initiate infant CPR? And his answer was, well, we don't do that. And I was in shock that we have a medical dispatcher that, responded that way. So I went to my first public meeting and I asked our 911 board if our dispatchers are certified. Well, first they want to know why I was at the meeting. That's an indicator. But it took about 15 minutes for them to answer, and they finally said all of our dispatchers are trained. I didn't ask if they were trained. I asked if they were certified. And I find out after the fact, my first Freedom of Information request was to the Illinois Department of Public Health. That's who issues the licenses for dispatching. And we uncovered that not only did they lie to me, but our dispatchers had not been certified for over 6 years. And I thought, if they're going to lie to me about that, what else are they lying about? And that's when I started attending meetings, and it went from there. We just found out that we've got a huge problem in local government.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. I'm going to pop up a quote here, and I'd love your thoughts on it. Apathy by the public is the single most harmful effect of corruption. Public refusal to remain silent and its refusal to accept corruption is the first line of defense against it. How would you respond to that? True or false?
Absolutely true. 100%. 100%. We the people have allowed our education system to fail in this country. And what I mean by that, we have stopped teaching our local government civic obligations to our kids. Mm-hmm. And we have a society now that is really ignorant as to what is supposed to be going on in local government. And I believe ignorance is only a sin when it's a preferred state of mind.
Interesting. So walk us through your watchdog model. How is it set up? And is this something that others could do?
Well, we have found that this is something that anybody can do. The first and most important thing is they have to be engaged. Go to a meeting. They have to walk through the door and sit down and make those officials aware of their presence. And a lot of times in that first 2 minutes, you'll know if you need to come back or not based on how they treat you. Who are you? Why are you here? What do you want? Those are all signals that tell us whether or not we've got a problem. So engaging is the first step. I think the next one is to learn the laws, and you don't have to be a lawyer in order to learn the laws. I think we've defaulted to lawyers on way too many things, and that's what leads to our ignorance. We just default and say, hey, I'm not a lawyer, I can't read it. And that's not the case at all. Townships have laws, fire districts have laws, municipality, and you just read what their powers and duties are and start seeing whether or not they're actually exercising those powers and duties. Asking questions, that's an important one. And not so much the question itself, but it's the response. Because we run into public bodies here in Illinois, you can go and speak at a meeting, but they're not required to answer you. Well, if they're not required to answer you, then that tells me they're not interested in transparency. So those are things that we're going to get answers sooner or later, and that's where we end up doing freedom of information requests and asking for key records. And through that process, those basic steps will give people a lot of ammunition as to what's going on right there in their local government.
So let me ask you this. As you've worked on some of these projects, because you've been really busy as of late, there's been a lot of stuff you've been working on in Illinois. Poor you and Adam. You guys have just, both in Illinois, there's all this corruption there, but I'm sure the citizens are grateful for you guys. Can you give us just a couple examples of things, of the corruption that you found and that you're working on, and kind of the steps that led you to where that you've actually had solutions on? I'm sure people would love to hear, happy stories, good endings.
You bet. Well, Adam and I met many years ago, and we just kind of had similar wheelhouse of what we were trying to accomplish, good governance. And I want to emphasize the importance of Adam's data. One of the meetings that we went to, we were asked by a health department to look into some stuff or some whistleblowers. And we were looking at numbers, and we go to the meeting, and the director was wanting a pay raise. And she had told the board she hadn't had a pay raise in 3 years, and it's time that she gets a pay raise. Well, we pulled up on Open the Books all of the financial data for her pay right there in the meeting. So when it came time for public comment, we challenged her. And we said, we've got the data here that says what you just told the board is not true. Well, the board had no idea that she had given herself a pay raise year after year after year. And they caught her lying, and they terminated her with, I think that was a Monday meeting. She was terminated by Friday of that week.
Wow.
So having access to the data so you can ask the right question can lead to that accountability. The accountability being, she was not honest with the board. If you can't trust them to be honest, that's not somebody that you want in your employ. Some of the other projects, and we definitely have got a lot going on. I think one of the biggest recent ones was with the Supreme Court here in Illinois confirmed our findings against our Auditor General that we exposed in 2016. It went through an entire adjudication process back and forth with the appellate court, back to the Supreme Court. And here we are 5 years later, and the court's confirmed exactly what we published in our first article in 2016. Our Auditor General violated the law. He spent campaign money for personal matters in direct violation of the law. He also admitted in a Freedom of Information lawsuit that it was a pro se lawsuit that I brought. He admitted to violating the Freedom of Information. So here we have an Auditor General that still has a job, in Illinois for, I think, another 10 years. It's a 10-year position, so he's got another 5 years left. So it's bad when you have people in those capacities that absolutely are not held accountable. And the accountability is the key. We've got to hold them accountable, and there has to be repercussions for the bad actors.
So the auditor in Illinois, who is the person who people trust to hold other people accountable, was corrupt and violating the law, and he still kept his job?
Not only has he still kept his job, next week we will be filing a Open Meetings Act lawsuit against our Attorney General, who we've identified violated the Open Meetings laws and possibly FOIA laws, depending on today's results. So it's not just local government. It is virtually every unit of government out there is doing things the way they feel they want to do them. They're not looking at the law and applying it to themselves. And our goal is to hold them accountable by asking simple questions, filing simple requests for records, and taking them to the next step to hold them accountable.
So what are the next steps, though, with the auditor? It's been ruled in your favor by the courts. It's been shown that he has violated the law. How can you have him removed from his position?
Well, that's an interesting problem in Illinois. He was put there by the legislature, and there is a pending House resolution. Unfortunately, our Speaker of the House refuses to allow that vote to come to the floor. What needs to happen is a vote. Now, I don't expect those people to vote him out, but we, the people, should see that vote so we know how those people voted, and we can determine who to put pressure on the next time they're up for election.
Kirk, thank you for that. Thank you for the work that you're doing. And my hopes are, too, is that you're inspiring other people to say, hey, I think I can do that as well. We're going to bring everybody in. We're going to have a lightning round is what this is labeled. And what I also want to do is encourage everybody, as you've been listening to our panelists, please feel free to put questions in the chat, because we will have also a live Q&A. So Kirk, I'm actually going to start with you on the lightning round. Where are you seeing the greatest corruption in the states?
Local government. The local townships, municipalities, fire districts, park districts. There's zero accountability at the local level because the county prosecutors are all part of the same political cabal, and they're not going to prosecute people in their own community. It's not politically savvy for them to do it.
Yeah, I've always told that hometown politics of small towns are the hardest because you see them everywhere. They're at church, they're at the grocery store, their wife might be teaching your kid. You specifically mentioned an area in local government that you and I spoke about, economic development. You said that's just A cash
It's probably one of the most scandalous operations. Counties and municipal government are allowed to spend your tax dollars with economic development corporations that aren't subject to any open records laws. There's no accountability to who's getting that. We know who's getting the money, and more often than not, it's those who are politically connected. And that whole entire statute needs to be revisited because it's out of control.
Wow. Well, I've seen that in a lot of our smaller communities, and I've heard a lot of stories. Thank you for that. So Adam, when you and I spoke the first time, now you've got Kristen and I here, we both worked in government, so we might push back on you just a little bit because we've been on the receiving end of some of these FOIAs. Typically it's by pesky folks from the press who just want to be a nuisance. So let me ask you this question. Do you think there is a time where it is appropriate for a government entity to not provide you the information that you're asking for?
Here's the quick answer. If you're asking for public information, there's not one single instance where it's appropriate to slow walk that, deny the request, or charge a fee. Never, and period. If you're asking for private information like public employees, social security numbers or things that you can't get under the law, of course you have to deny that request. So, when we file these things, we find incredible things like in the city of New York, in the public schools, the school janitors make up to $256,000 and out earn the school principals who make an average of $154,000. Here in Illinois, there are 16 retired superintendents that make more in retirement than $300,000. There's 40,000 Illinois educators making six figures, $100,000 or more, and only 24,000 of them are currently in the classroom. There's 16,000 of those six-figure pensions, they're retired.
So I'll give you my example that I was thinking of. We had judicial candidates when I worked for my boss, and the press wanted to know who all those candidates were. They felt like that the public should know who was being interviewed. My philosophy is this is personnel. We don't let everybody know who's applied for a job. And also on behalf of the candidates themselves, if they worked for a big law firm and a client of that law firm found out that they were applying for a judiciary position, that could then end up hurting the law firm. So we fought the press on providing them those names. They get the final three, but everybody else on that list of 20, we didn't think that was any of their business. So do you think I was right or wrong?
I don't know what your state law would say on that. So I come at this from the financial perspective. Mm-hmm. And so we have to go back to what's written in the founding documents. And it's pretty incredible. Our founders knew that knowledge was power. They recognized the power of transparency, and they wrote it into Article 1, Section 9 of the United States Constitution, a regular statement and account of the receipts and expenditures of all public money shall be published from time to time. Look, government exists for the good of the people. It's there for we the people. So any government official that's responding to a sunshine request, they have to understand that we the people, the press, the pundits, challengers to the incumbent political class, politicians themselves, we already own the documents that we're requesting. We're following a statutory process to simply take possession of documents we already own. And that's the Freedom of Information Act. And so duty number one as a public official, a public servant, is to serve the people, to get them as fast and as easy as possible the public documents that person already owns and that you're duty bound to produce.
Well, I wouldn't disagree with much of what you said, but I'm sure we can sit down and have a drink on some of the others and discuss it on another day. Kristen, so this is your lightning round question. How can our government better manage their offices to enable transparency and accountability?
So first, I appreciate being on this panel with Adam and Kurt and appreciate the work they're doing. Government needs constant pressure. It's a monopoly. We need external pressure. Having been in government and for a long time, I think there's so much more capacity. I think there is some corruption out there. I think a lot of the frontline people are just doing the best they can within a poorly designed system. So for me, it goes back. I'm a if I want a result, for example, in Utah, one of the results I wanted was a bottom line number. And then I'll tell you where this comes from, Kim. We have fewer employees today in Utah than we did in year 2000, right? So when we look at the labor cost, what that would have cost us on an annual basis, it's like 400 million. So if we're not getting big results in what we're doing, I'm not interested. So you have to think about where you're going to focus. I think the personnel data is really important. I think we've got to be accountable for our salaries. And most of the money is spent in these big buckets: transportation, Medicaid, education. There's like about six of them, law enforcement. And so we really need to get back to, in addition to all the great work Kurt and Adam are doing to make sure we're doing it with integrity, are we delivering the basic outcomes? Yeah. Are we better? Are we faster? Are we cheaper? Because it's like government's it's like this black hole. The money goes in and you don't know what you're getting out of it. And they should be able to clearly say, we got $100 million investment, and not thousands of like complex stuff that make you go crazy. What did you get out of that? You put $100 million in a new testing system in your local school district. What's the result of that? Or do we have an increase in student proficiency in reading? We can serve more kids for the same cost, or our costs have gone down? It's really, in addition to the fiscal integrity, can we show for every dollar we took from the taxpayer, it's not our money, we took from them, can we demonstrate that we actually provided a better product for less money?
I love that.
We've got to get to that bottom line.
I love that. You guys, we're going to go to our live Q&A. I know I've got one question in here. As a local citizen, how can I access public records? Is there a process? So I think either Kirk or Adam, one of you can take this.
Kirk's earned the right to answer this question. By filing Freedom of Information Act requests and holding people accountable, him and his partner have resulted in roughly 500 Illinois public officials fleeing their position over the course of the last 5 or 6 years.
Wow. Kirk.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Adam. Yeah, it's the accountability side of it. The bottom line is just ask for the records. Every state has open records laws. You should be able to walk in and ask for most common records. They have a process. If they tell you it's not something what we call a demand record, that they would have to produce instantly, you just file a Freedom of Information request. Those typically have to be written out, and you submit that to whatever agency you're wanting records for, and then you wait the appropriate time for them to turn over the records. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to turn over the records. That's where you have to get creative. And Adam, you may recall the school menu that we dug up years ago, a state representative that unbelievable malfeasance, but the bottom line was they wouldn't give us the records. So I went to the library and I read through the regular newspaper listings for the daily lunch schedule to identify when that man was supposed to be at that school versus in Springfield as a state representative. And we caught him cooking the books.
Wow.
And Kim, just to add on that really quick, I don't know how you work there, but all the agencies I've worked in, there's usually a person who's responsible for open records requests. So if you feel like lost in the bureaucracy, just ask who's over the open records request or FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, Sunshine, whatever that's called in your state. So they just don't toss you around from person to person.
Yeah, every public body is supposed to have a FOIA officer. Now, ironically, here in Illinois, our Attorney General's website was ransom hacked back in April, and we currently have an entire group of elected officials that have not taken their online training to know they're supposed to have a FOIA officer. They still can't access their own data here in the state of Illinois because of that hack. But typically it's a FOIA officer. They can direct you. They'll be able to tell you, what records you can or can't have. A lot of them have an actual spreadsheet that outlines what a demand records are available. You can walk in and just get them, straightforward. And every state is different. Our state, in 5 days, they have to respond. We're dealing with some stuff in Florida that I'm almost 60 days out now and I still don't have my records. So every state has the games that they play.
Yeah. Well, if there's no more questions in the chat, and I know sometimes this topic is overwhelming. I mean, you can go to Kirk's site, and Kristen's got some wonderful stuff. If you're on LinkedIn, I would highly recommend that you follow her and look at the stuff that she's providing. Adam and Open the Books. And so we firmly believe at the Policy Circle to give everyone, when they exit this time together, a call to action. And so, Kristen, I'm going to start with you, and I'm going to ask you if you could give the folks who are on this program or who will be listening at a later time a call to action. What would that be?
First of all, chase the thing that you have natural curiosity and interest in, right? Because government's huge and you can't fix everything at once. So where do you have, look at Kurt, the 911 call and how that drove him and what a beautiful story that is. So where do you have natural interest and curiosity? Because this can be a grind and you need to have some passion for this to continue it out. And don't feel, I would just say, start asking questions. That's all it is. Yep. Find who your local representative is, find the issue you're interested in, and start asking questions. And it's through the questions you'll start to get clarity on what you really want to hone in on. Just start there, and it's enough, and you'll get going. You'll find that all these people with all these fancy titles, they're just people. Don't be intimidated. They're just people. Governors, congressmen, city representatives, they're just folks like anyone else, and you have a right to know.
I love that. Kirk, how about you?
Well, I totally agree with what Kristen said. Asking questions is critical. And one of actually, there's two key questions I always ask is says who and with what proof. We get told a lot of things by officials, but then they can't ever back it up. And through this process, we've learned anybody can do what we do. Anybody can ask questions. Anybody that's ever graduated school should be able to read and comprehend what the law says versus what they're told. And then reach out for help. There's a lot of networks out there. And what we found through what we were doing, there was a need to train people how to do what we do. And that's why we formed American Watchdogs. And we go all over the country and put on training seminars on how people can get active in their local government. We don't charge for those. We put 25 or more people in a room, and we apply the laws that are for their state, and we're going to educate them on how to get things rolling right there in their backyard.
I love that. Kirk, thank you. Adam, I'm going to let you wrap it up.
Sounds good. I would file one Freedom of Information Act request on your local school districts, how many of them that you have locally, on the superintendent with his credit card payments, his electronic purchase card payments over the course of the past 12 months. Look, 9 times out of 10, you're going to find personal expenses charged to the public credit card. It's absolutely extraordinary. They think that nobody's watching. They get sloppy with it. I had the governor of Oregon charging off her personal law dues. She's a lawyer. She was charging her law dues as Secretary of State. Having a law degree and being a lawyer has nothing to do with the Secretary of State position. And she was charging that to the public credit card. And if that's going on in the executive branch in a state, it's going on by and large in your local school district. So start there and start asking questions about the expenditures.
Excellent. So we've been charged with ask questions, find your passion, what you're curious about. We've got Kirk, who's got training available, and Adam has challenged you to request a FOIA on your local superintendent's charge card for the district. I'm sure they're going to love that one. So
if I may, Kim, real quick, to piggyback off of what Adam said, you want all pages of the credit card statements. They love to give you the summary, but they hate giving you every page. And that's where the spending is. And once you get that, you can FOIA the request for the receipts to that spending. That's where it gets fun.
That's excellent. Thank you. Very good counsel there. I want to thank everybody on the panel. It's been a privilege. You guys are doing phenomenal work. And I know you inspire me to become even more curious and engaged in my local community. And I know that you will inspire the folks who are watching us today as well. So thank you so much for that.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Before we wrap up our program today, please take a moment to learn more about how you can take action. So I'll give you a few ideas. Host a conversation utilizing our transparency and accountability brief. This can be a policy circle, or you can gather work colleagues or friends and maybe different stakeholders in your community. Utilize Open the Books to investigate the budget and spending of your municipal government or your state government on a specific initiative. I know that Kirk referenced economic development areas, so that hopefully you're curious about that in your area. And also look into your state's transparency laws. And I would also encourage you to watch American Watchdogs training videos. Once again, I want to thank our generous network collaborators. We are so grateful for your support of the Policy Circle. And if you found today's programming something worthwhile to you, maybe you would consider joining the Policy Circle community. A donation of $10 a month or $100 a year gives you access to virtual programs and our Policy Circle brief library. Most importantly, you become a part of a thriving national community of women who are ready to learn and lead. And thank you for everyone tuning in today and even watching later. We appreciate your time and support, and I would like to encourage you to stay curious, not furious, and circle up with the Policy Circle. Have a great day.